Hello, and welcome to our thought-provoking podcast with myself, actor, writer, director and deep thinker, Libby MacArthur, counsellor, life coach and all-round mountain man, Ross Hislop, and compassionate, strong advocate for women, motivational speaker and broadcaster, Anne Hughes. In this series of podcasts, we talk about the things that we hardly ever talk about. We attempt to unpack the obvious, important, enormous life topics, questions and controversial issues that no one hardly ever mentions or wants to discuss. Because it makes, well, at least some of us, feel a tad uncomfortable. Nothing here is overlooked. This is the elephant in the room. In this week's podcast, we attempted to unpick just what exactly unconscious bias is and how does it affect us. Human beings are hardwired to make intuitive decisions about other people. We go about our daily lives making unconscious judgments that affect our attitudes and behaviours towards others. But what Ross, Anne and myself tried to understand is, when does this bias become a problem and something that's used to exclude others? So we started off by getting a watertight definition on what exactly unconscious bias is, and we took it from there. Have a listen. Unconscious bias.
It's busting my nut. I don't understand what it is.
Well, I'll tell you what, and here's the first thing. You know how that we were on TV now, if you're looking at adverts or you're looking at dramas, all of a sudden there's a really healthy mix of different shades of skin colour. And all of a sudden you realise they've been missing.
Not they're absent from our media.
Oh my God, you know, you just think, it never occurred to me that there weren't black families doing Tesco adverts. You know, it's only now that I look at all these products being sold by a whole range of folk on the spectrum of different skin colour that I go, oh my goodness, it was predominantly white.
But there's the thing, it's no just about colour either, isn't it? It's about so much stuff. And I do want to kick us off with a tiny wee bit of a definition that an unconscious bias affects your behaviour or decisions without you realising it.
Absolutely.
And so therefore in that conversation this week, and me trying to unpick what are my unconscious biases. And it was funny, Gary said to me the other day, no, Anne, I think that's a conscious bias. Because he's like, that is deliberate. You mean it when you don't like they people. Whatever group or setting that may be in.
Yeah.
That we have.
And you're very aware of that.
I'm very aware of that,
Yeah.
And because so much of the unconscious bias stuff, it's like in an interview situation. And I would literally always go for a woman and always go for an underdog.
Yeah.
So my unconscious bias would always probably take me, if a black woman's in the interview, then that's probably who I'm giving the job to.
Sure.
Because I always want to help the people that are the underdogs.
I know.
But that actually turns out as maybe a conscious bias.
Indeed.
I don't know.
I was laughing at myself thinking, right, what's the opposite of an unconscious bias? A conscious bias? And
Yes.
then I thought, no, propaganda, that's the opposite of an unconscious bias. When it's not just, and you know, there's malice intent involved, you know.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I think we are talking about things that take us unawares. You know, we kind of go, oh, that's a riddy. Oh, that's a pure riddy. I never even realised. My first thought was at a time when a pal of mine had arranged to meet another pal. There was three of us going out for a drink and we were going to meet in Central Station, and it happened to be an old firm game. So me and my pal Mary Docherty were standing bemoaning the discrimination, all that kind of sense of the sectarian old firm kind of stuff. You know, we were going, poor old Glasgow's get this and it's a terrible thing for it and that's awful and stuff. And Mary smoked like a lum and we were standing there, and in those days she was smoking. So we were standing at the Central Station smoking away, and a guy came along with, you know, the Union Jack as a cape and his wee blue, you know, shirt on. He's like, got a light in, you got a light in. And we were as cold as anything. And we were like, aye, no bother. Aye, there you go, there's your light, son. Aye, you're welcome. Cheerio, stony-faced. Next wee guy comes up, green and white hoops. We're like, hiya. Would you want what was the score? You know, kind of. And it was only when the wee Celtic supporter went away that we both looked at each other as lapsed Tims and went, oh my God. We 1 minute we're bemoaning sectarianism, next thing our attitude towards those two boys were complete.
And yet they were just the same guy.
Same wee guy.
Oh,
you know,
wow.
and you just put those two wee guys in the terraces. Put those wee guys in the terraces. You don't even know their first names. You don't even know where they live, what they do, what their grannies are like, anything. And you watch them want to punch lumps at each other.
Aye.
Do you know what I mean? And you go, God, you guys know nothing about each other except you're on a different team.
I know.
Right. So On that, you're talking about people. And I became aware of unconscious bias probably about 20 years ago. I had a chocolate Doberman, right? Big, ferocious, hefty, muscular beast. And folk used to come up, oh, what a lovely dog. And I would say, oh, it's a Doberman. And then they would have a wee step back. But there wasn't really any bias towards that dog because there weren't a lot of them about. I then got a black Doberman. And then I started to notice that people used to cross the street. And what I started to notice that when people used to cross the street, the Doberman would notice that people were starting to cross the street away from it. And I started to think, I wonder if the animal is perceiving the unconscious bias or fear response that it's got about Doberman that's been set up in them because Dobermans are ferocious dogs. And the Doberman starts to act out in a ferocious way because of the way that people are perceiving them. Now, you mentioned about supporters. Now, you've then just projected an unconscious bias onto that person, and that person is going to succumb to your projection. That's not your responsibility, Libby, but it's their responsibility if they act it out. How many people are acting in a particular way because of the projections of our unconscious bias that we are placing upon them?
Absolutely. Do you know it's actually a fact that black animals get left behind? You know, shelters, dogs and cats that are black are the last to get picked up.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's interesting that, you know, that whole notion of, you know, there's something kind of demonic in the black dog. There's something, you know, kind of,
it's like,
you know, black. It's another word for depression, isn't it? The black dog visit.
Black dog. But people, you know, I've got an unconscious bias. This person's innocent. My unconscious bias gets invisibly projected out into the field onto them and they catch it and then they start to act out in a manner that's going to fulfil my internal narrative. So how much are we all caught in an entanglement around about this invisible, unspoken elephant of unconscious biases?
I mean, are any of us up for owning an unconscious bias?
I get loads of them.
So let's all pick one. Let's all pick just the one.
Well, I suppose for me it would be privately educated, you know, lives in Surrey, sense of entitlement, you know. I just think, you know, you're just an ignoramus, you know. I would just think, you know, clever, stupid, you know, no matter whatever degrees you've got, as far as I'm concerned, you're just completely, you know, you've got no real wisdom, you've got no real sense. For me, it looks, you know, who's in leadership at the moment in terms of our country? Boris Johnson. I see the guy as an absolute twat, but a really seriously dangerous one because of the amount of power that he can wield, you know. So yeah, I have a big unconscious bias towards folk who have been privately educated and have money. I just don't think they're fully fledged human beings.
But you, Ross?
Oh, there's one comes to mind, but I've got loads. I've got a library, a catalogue of unconscious biases. But in February, I met a girl. She became a friend, Natalie, and she jumped out the car. We were going to hike a mountain at 2:00 in the morning in the middle of winter, and she jumped out, and she was stereotypical blonde hair, blue eyes, eyelashes, painted nails, you know, and looked like a dolly bird, shall we say. And the minute she jumped out the car, I watched my brain go, oh, here we go. How much is she going to hold us up? And in actual fact, I walked the whole walk with her. She's got the heart of gold. She's got the heart of a lion. She's got so much courage. She's had so much bravery in her life. And she's just got the heart of gold. She's an absolute superstar. But that very first seeing her, how I projected into that it was going to be a completely different way.
Mm-hmm. The dolly bird.
I know, horrible.
And she wouldn't be able to climb.
She's not going to be able to climb. She bet all the boys.
I suppose as a female, and the opposite of the dolly bird would be, you know, the macho guy, the guy that's covered in tattoos, you know, the guy that's
tattoos,
you know, the guy that's all built up and stuff, you know. You know, that would be, I would assume that he's going to be, you know, Neanderthal.
Aye. I think that mine's is probably, well, I could generically say it's men, but I won't be that cruel because I do obviously have a husband and a son and male friends, you know. But I think it's like middle class, middle-aged men in grey suits with grey hair and grey attitudes. And I know that I scare the fuck out of them because quite honestly, you're right, I don't know what I'm going to say next either. But the fact that, right, if I could walk into a room with somebody, say an opportunity come up, and I walked into a room with somebody and that's what they look like, I'm already like in the back state because now I'm like, this isn't going to work. I'm not going to get on with him. So where's the point is even wasting our time kidding on?
Yeah. So there's
But how do I know that just because he doesn't dress well and his hair, nature has turned his hair a different colour, does not mean that I'm not going to get on with this guy, but I would automatically assume I wasn't.
Sure. And we are talking about bad othering here, aren't we? We're talking about our projections. And, and what are these assumptions? The phrase that sums it up for me, that the unconscious bias, is when we look at somebody and we go, well, it's a shame for me, but it's all right for you. And maybe when I'm actually doing unconscious bias, there's a bit of me that thinks they've got it too easy. They've got, the sense of entitlement comes up big in my head, that idea of that's something I cannot bear, as somebody with a sense of entitlement. If somebody said to me, listen, this guy's a multimillionaire, this guy's a billionaire, other folk might think very talented, very clever, astute, able. I just would think, who have you ripped off?
You don't become a billionaire without exploiting people, as my daughter tells me.
That would be my bias straight away,
But there's that affinity bias, isn't there? And I think I've definitely got that, where you gravitate towards people that are similar to you. So if I knew I was meeting somebody and they grew up in an area similar to me, so probably didn't have a lot, and sort of I grew up in that very west of Scotland, working class, probably Catholic sort of a background, I assume I'm going to go on with this person.
Sure.
I do. I just automatically assume I've got a great with them. We're just the same.
Aye.
That doesn't always work out for me, obviously.
It doesn't always work out. Absolutely.
I've got an unconscious bias against people that are homophobic. I think when you said I got on with them, the minute I hear somebody that's kind of starts banging their opinions around about sexuality, I just go right after them, and they're probably really decent people. No, they're no. They're no. But unconscious, something that has changed that I've had to work at, and that was an unconscious conditioning, was that I was brought up in a family, I was brought up a single parent with my mother and my two sisters. So I naturally gravitated more towards the company of women. I found it quite difficult to be around men because there was perhaps less of a variety of men in the 80s or early 90s than there is now. And it's only now in my late 40s that I have got really good male friends, because the type of male, the stereotypical, goes to the club, plays darts, plays pools, into football, that's never been my kind of guy. So I had more of an unconscious bias towards those kind of men, because they weren't in my house. They weren't, my mum and my sisters didn't watch football, know that women can't, but, they were into fashion and art and fabrics, and my mum was a hairdresser. And it's only been in the last sort of 10 years that I can say that I've formed really good relationships with men. And that was an unconscious bias.
Well, if we turned it on its head, because I've got one for this, and said, have people had unconscious bias towards us? I think.
Oh, for sure.
Has men had unconscious bias towards women?
No. Just has anybody had an unconscious bias towards me? Have I had an experience of thinking they think they know who I am, but they don't?
Absolutely.
So I think, and I get this is my shit that some of my pals tell me to stop harping on about, but as a working class woman, I think that sometimes I go into situations and people think they know who I am and they can tell a story about me. And I know when this isn't a fight worth having with you, because you think you know who I am. You maybe don't. And it's almost like they struggle to marry up, especially in a work environment, what words I'm talking about, what intellect I'm bringing, what wisdom I'm bringing to the situation, a lot of strategic work that I do. But they can't, especially really middle class people, can't marry it up. And in a piece of work I was doing recently, one day, I'd been there for quite a long time, and a woman said to me when we were talking about somebody that was underperforming, but you're quite intimidating, Anne. And I was like, well, granted, I probably could be if I wanted to be, I'll grant you that, but never once have I been intimidating here. And that, she was very posh London, that was all based on me having a Glaswegian accent. 100% it was. Then I found out she went to uni in Glasgow, so obviously a big Glasgow woman intimidated her a few times, and she just thought every Glaswegian is intimidating. But she was now projecting that.
Absolutely.
And yes, and that's what we were talking. If you then act out that projection, that's your responsibility, but then also feeds into their unconscious bias that then you allow them to be right. Well, let me explain that a wee bit better. So if I walk into a room and I feel the projection of another person's unconscious bias onto me, and I get a sense they don't like me, right? and then I start to react or indeed respond to their unconscious bias, well, I'm only feeding into making them right. But if I keep true to myself and I hold myself, that can turn because I'm not acting at the projection. They might think, oh, actually, he's not what I expected him to be.
Yeah.
And the tables can turn. But that's something that's had to be learned, because a lot of people see that somebody doesn't like you and then you just start playing into their hands by being a wido or a wee bit aggressive or a wee bit quick to respond or react to them. And then there's no healing.
My response with that is, you're lucky you can only meet me on Zoom, hen, because oh my God, if you met me in person, would I fully gear up the intimidating? You're damn right I would no.
So maybe there's what you're saying then, Ross, is that thing of like, don't do that, Anne. And
exactly.
maybe it's like hold back.
Do the opposite.
And kind of like literally be counterintuitive. And the one that I got with me, which was quite good fun, was Eddie Mair on the radio. So before Fred Macaulay would do BBC Scotland every morning, I used to go with Eddie Mair on a Wednesday morning, and my job was just to talk to folk. So I'd be talking exactly the way I'm talking now, you know, this kind of accent, Scottish, BBC radio, and Mary would phone for Aberdeen. I'd go, well, Mary, the thing about what you're saying is, so it was a kind of big problem-solving slot kind of thing and stuff, and Eddie Mair was on it with me, and it was great fun. And anyway, the next thing, someone comes on, and he literally said, that girl on the radio, she can't even speak the Queen's goddamn English. What's the BBC coming to us? Unknown goes as well, not in charge. What's going on? She can't do. We can't have people like her speaking on the radio, you know. Anyway, so of course Eddie Mair's killing himself laughing, and my bottle's crashed. I've completely feel as if the Parkes whistle's gone, the big shepherd crook's on my neck, the big hand on the shoulder, as if you stole the chicken for the supermarket. I literally, my bottom fall out my world, and I thought, God, he's right. I can't be on the radio talking like this, you know? So anyway, I got it together. Eddie was killing himself laughing, you know, and I was going, you speak, you know, miming, you speak next. And he was like, no, you speak, miming. Anyway, eventually, his name is John Reid, this guy. And eventually I said, listen, John, you obviously can speak the Queen's goddamn English. So I've spoke to Eddie, and he says it's okay if you come on and take this slot next Wednesday. So because, you know, but just before we get that organised, I'm speaking a dialect, and this is BBC Scotland, and there's loads of different dialects, and believe it or not, John, you've got one. You've actually got an accent, and do you know what's really weird? See, your accent, I've got a whole story about that. I've got a whole story about the marbles in your mouth Scottish for mouth. Anyway, end of that story was that the lines were jammed, and it was people from Norway and Sweden all phoning in to say, we love an accent. We love to hear our accent.
Because there was all this stuff about Alex Scott, is it she's called, the BBC presenter, on just like recently and during the Olympics in Tokyo, and some lord other, I don't know who he was. I don't remember his name. I only remember Alex's name. And he had complained about the fact that she wasn't using her G's, so she was saying the swim in, the run in.
It's interesting.
And it's like, does that matter? Can somebody please be on you what she was saying?
Yeah,
but I do feel as if, like,
yeah, and if you get the communication over the net, yeah, I mean, what does it matter?
I don't think it is, and I do think that isn't this lovely that we can have our own accents. I've always got my own accent now, and sadly, I'll say maybe this is my shit, I think it's closed doors for me, the fact I speak the way I do. I really do believe it's closed doors for me.
But you know, and if you think about it as the child's in primary school, and the Wayne's mammy, daddy, granny and granddads all say windy, and the teacher's going, it's not windy, it's window, you're wrong. And all of a sudden his whole world is wrong.
Family is wrong. His whole system is wrong.
Yeah.
Then he is wrong. So it's shame based. So then we get shamed because we're not speaking the Queen's English.
But I suppose what we're saying is unconscious bias is seeded up from our cultural family units, isn't it? So we don't even know that we're... Like me, I didn't know I was a Celtic supporter. I didn't think I cared if it, but football.
But to admit that there's an unconscious bias between the Scottish and the English, that's no one-sided. There's an unconscious bias in the Scottish that people have said that we're this red-headed tartan. Everybody thinks you wear a kilt.
I know.
You know, you're this red-headed, everybody drinks, they're all wild. You come to Glasgow, you'll get slashed. So there's unconscious biases being placed upon us. And it's almost like when you start to really go into unconscious biases, it's got a foot in racism, it's got a foot in inequality. And we could be out and we could be fighting for equality, which is very difficult to get because we're all very different, but we're fighting for equality. but we've got an unconscious bias, which is actually where we're looking at inequality. It's that complete contrast within the system. And, you know,
and there's a lot of half-truths there masquerading as whole truths.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
There's a lot of...
So why, I suppose, then, do you think we've got unconscious bias? You know, what is that? Where does that come from?
Are we being lazy?
We're not making our own mind up. We're not valuing
to question.
We're not questioning it. It's back to that. We're not questioning that we're allowing authority, the authority of our parents. I live in Lanark, I live in a small town, and I can look at families who the boy supports Rangers, his dad supports Rangers, his grandfather supported Rangers, and they all go in the Rangers bus together to go and see Rangers play. And they've inherited the beliefs of their grandparents, and that this segregation, you know, my family, my grandmother was from England. She was from Yorkshire. She married my grandfather, who was predominantly Scotland. His father, John, offered to pay her a large sum of money to go back to England. He never saw my grandson was my father. He never saw his grandson, my father, until my father was 3, and they lived 100 yards away from one another.
Wow, terrible.
He used to shout at the bottom of the garden something along the lines of, "You dirty Sassenach, get back to England," and da. And then these are all unconscious biases that are set up in all our systems, and it was only a generation ago.
Sure. But you know, one of the things I mean, that's a sad story. The word Sassenach's quite interesting because it actually comes from Northerner. I was watching Have I Got News For You one night a couple of years ago, and it's one of my favourite programmes, and I was like, oh, great. And it was Ray Winston was the guy in the middle, you know, the kind of girl. So he spent the whole programme talking about the sweaty socks. At no point did he say the Scots. He actually only said the sweaty socks. There's a lot of laughter about it and all that kind of thing. And I sat and I thought, what's the put down word that the Scots have for an Englishman? Can you think of one? You know, and it's that kind of thing of, you know, have an Airbnb room. So I'll get a guy from London coming to stay in the Airbnb room. And one guy sat down and he said to me, why do the Scots hate the English? And I was like,
we don't.
I don't think they do. I really don't.
I know.
He says, well, what's all this independence stuff? And I was going,
it's not about you, Tal.
It's not about you,
you know. And I was kind of laughing and saying to him, you know, I think there's an unconscious bias there with you that, you know, there's this kind of way of being. And that stuff with the Glaswegian being violent, you know, every time somebody's came back for a day in Glasgow, I've gone, did you meet anyone who wanted to stab you? And then, of course, the absolute opposite. They're going, folk are weird here. They chat to you. They show you the way. They take you the place you want to go. I mean, I don't think that's too romantic, an idea of Glaswegians. I do. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's a very sophisticated way to be friendly to your strangers.
It's funny because there's the whole thing, isn't there, with English people saying that Scots are mean. In my experience of the world, it's the complete opposite. And this was an actual story in an uncomfortable moment. Last week I was in London and I was sitting with people that I've only known virtually, but this was me. So I know them quite well. And they were telling me some story that it was a story that basically started with somebody getting their breakfast late in a cafe of poached eggs, taking them to the office with them, opening the box, they had fell apart, and taking them back to the cafe 4 hours later at lunchtime to get their money back. And I was laughing and I was saying that is the most English thing I have ever heard. And I was sitting at a table surrounded by English people, and surprise, surprise, of course they were offended by me saying that's the most English thing I've ever seen. And so I had to apologise. But genuinely, I can sit here with you and say that's the most English thing I've ever heard.
I tell you, see the Scots as meanies, that really gets my goat. I'll tell you why. I think the unconscious bias is such that if you finished off your thinking, what you're actually talking about is a gift of thrift. And the gift of thrift is a wonderful thing, you know, the make do, the mend. That's a beautiful thing to fix a chair or, you know, put a leather patch on an elbow. It's a beautiful way to be the gift of thrift. But the idea of the Scots as mean isn't just coming from England. It's an international thing. You know, see if you go to Germany, that you would read in German supermarkets, you would read low price, great value, Scottish price. There's actually the lowest price you can get of a thing is called in German the Scottish price. So out there's this thing of the Scots as mean, but do you know what I think's really going on there behind all of that unconscious bias? There's a gaslightness. There's a sense in us Scots that you should not waste. You should not be someone who's reckless in a way where you take things for granted or you waste things. And I think that comes all the way from the Highland clearances. It comes from a nation that has actually been in so many times of its life, oppressed. So there's a great sense of taking care and enjoying stuff. And I think the gift of thrifts, loads of my girlfriends have, had stalls in the Barras and stalls in the Square Yard, and they're always excited about finding things that have got, great material, beautiful stitching and stuff like that. And anybody could look at that and go, you buy everything second hand, and think it's mean. It's not.
See, a long time ago now, 2005, I was lucky enough to go and do the Inca Trail in Peru, right? And it was like a charity thing. I worked in this sector and I was going on that, right? So the doctor who was there was of Asian descent. He was from London, right? It was people all over the UK. And I remember the story that sort of I got everybody laughing together and having a bit of a joining when we all met at Heathrow Airport was when he had got on the tube. He was from London. He'd got on the tube in London with his big backpack on, because we all had to obviously take a big backpack to go and trek through Peru. He'd cleared the carriage because this wasn't that long after 9/11. Oh. It was 4 years the other side of it. And he says, if I never knew that all I needed to do to get a seat on the underground was wear a backpack. And, we were really laughing about it. But I suppose we were laughing about it. His experience of that story, I'm sure he must have had a bit of pain and hurt about that. But it's that unconscious bias that can really, when you're getting on a plane.
Yes.
Or, when I'm getting on the underground, even in Glasgow myself, I always go in the carriage that the driver's in, because I think that's the safer thing to do.
Really?
I always do. Because I think that's the safest thing to do, and that's what I've said to my daughter to do. So we've got all these especially around travel, haven't we?
Yes.
About what's safe and what's not.
Yes, yeah. I said to you, I was hiking up in Ben Nevis on Saturday just past, and I noticed that no fault of their own, I was an Indian family walking towards me, and I found myself holding my breath as I walked past them, or wanting to step a few metres away from them. Why? Because I unconsciously believed they were carrying the Delta 5 variant. That was an unconscious bias.
So is this the media, do you think, that's peddling this?
Peddling our unconscious biases.
Where does this come from?
Well, it comes for your house. It comes
for the image of what a terrorist looks like.
The image of a terrorist.
The image of what somebody carrying COVID looks like. And so we didn't make them up in our minds. Somebody put that image in our minds, because every image is put in our minds.
Sure, we're all victims of that propaganda, and those horrible words like swarm. And do you know, one of the unconscious biases I've got is I get disappointed if I think folks should know better. So, I was talking to a bunch of boys, beautiful looking young men, happen to be Asian, happen to be from the south side, happen to be Glaswegian, happen to be from lots of money. And their conversation was all about migrants. There's a bit of me that thinks, you should know better. Your dad was probably your dad, maybe your granddad was an immigrant. How come? And then I think, is this a scarcity thing? Is this, and then I think Priti Patel, she's Indian descent, is there something in there about fear? Your own self-loathing, your own scarcity beliefs that, I get away with it, no, wait a minute, I don't know.
Is it fear when I go into a room with the grey man and his grey suit with his grey attitudes and his grey complexion? Then is that fear because I'm thinking you're going to reject me now?
That's what I've just man on the radio.
If I just put myself into a situation where I'm going to be rejected, so why am I sitting here? So ultimately, is it about fear? Am I scared? Probably.
Yeah.
And we can't no mention racism in the gollywog that was on the side of the marmalade jar.
I don't mean ever
that
thought...
That was only a generation
Listen, I remember, the black and white minstrel show. And you get,
that's right. I remember watching that.
What were we thinking?
What were we thinking or no thinking? We weren't thinking. We were setting up a whole generation of people to be racist. And we have those unconscious biases. I loved the one Anne just said there.
Yeah.
You see an Asian man with a beard and a backpack, and immediately he's a terrorist.
Yeah.
Immediately, in my head, he's a terrorist. There's an unconscious bias right there.
I know. Obviously, we're three white people here, but remember my dad saying to me, in America, the best and the worst things happen. So if you wanted a black female judge, you're not going to find it in the UK. You're going to find it in America, And of course, what he's basically saying is that the black female judge is going to be a fairer judge. And of course, that's what I think. But is that an unconscious bias? How do I know that person just...
What I think's interesting as well with young people these days, one of the biases, they call it the halo or horns effect, which is where you perceive somebody to be great because of some attribute that they have. And so it's like the whole social media thing, isn't it? She's got 1 million followers. I mean, my daughters will tell me somebody, like they're watching Love Island and they're saying, that's how many followers they've got on Instagram. So all of a sudden they go up the pecking order a wee bit because of how many followers they've got on Instagram.
Yes.
But they might not even be a nice person.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, how do we attribute, or if, you know, if you said he works here or they work there or they've got that, you would be like, you would put a value on them, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Well, I mean, obviously celebrities get a lot to answer for. I mean, in my wee tiny experience of being somebody that folk would recognise on the street and go, oh my God, you're Gina out at River City. There was loads of projections and unconscious biases there. But as an actor in general, I remember saying to somebody once, Phil, I'm actually quite shy. And they were just going, oh, get out. Oh, you. I was going, no, they call acting the shy man's revenge. Have you never heard that? And they just thought this was ludicrous that I could possibly say I was shy. And of course, my bottle crashes at any given moment. You know, you both know that. I have moments where I completely lose any confidence in myself, you know. But that projection of, oh my God, if you're somebody that's folk are asking for your autograph, you know. I mean, the idea that... I remember going to a personal development workshop once and it was all about the not okay feeling deep inside, the not enough feeling deep inside. And we had to share with the stranger next to us about how we tried to compensate to cover that up. You know, and one was going, well, I've got 5 degrees, and the other one was going, well, I've got loads of plastic surgery. And I said to the woman next to me who didn't know me, I said, well, I'm in a soap opera and people ask my autograph. And she went, oh, well. And she basically went, oh, well, that'll do it then. Well, you've obviously cracked that not good enoughness. And I just looked at her and she looked at me, and the next time we were hysterical. It's what we always say. It's about connecting back in with ourselves, isn't it? It's about making ourselves innocent and
seeing it. I think, and as your
awareness, consciousness,
because you know, we haven't researched this. We're just emptying our heads and talking about what we think about and sharing our views, and it's just our opinion. We're not saying we're right. We're just having a conversation. It's school for me, 1983, 84. I'll never forget it. HIV hit the UK like a pandemic, like COVID, and we had talks on it and all the rest of it. I then had an unconscious bias that HIV was only for gay men, and then it became drug users, right? And it was like, genuinely, I went through a period when I used to go into a club in Edinburgh that I used to wipe the rim of my glass with my shirt. Or if, like this pandemic, exactly the same as this COVID, I now have lots of gay friends that have not got HIV, and HIV isn't going to jump off of them and land on me. I had this unconscious bias back in the 80s, getting into Edinburgh, admitting that I did go into Edinburgh for a night out in the 80s, that if I stood next to a gay male man, I was going to end up contributing HIV. That was the madness. The way that we had been educated, our sex education system around about HIV in schools were absolutely deplorable, and like this pandemic, only bred fear.
yeah.
Right? How outcast did the gay community feel in the 80s? You know, people will probably not be able to comprehend what I'm saying to you now. When you're at school where there's LGBT rights and counsellors and communities and it's accepted, 30, 40 years ago, gay people were outcast.
And along with that, if you were a homosexual, then you were interested in casual sex. You weren't interested in relationships. You know, you weren't interested in marriage. You weren't, I mean, thankfully, that's all shifting and changing now. Not least because
that's not just gay men. Lots of people are just interested in casual relationships.
No, but you'd assume that they would especially not be interested in marriage.
All gay men were into Wayne's. Gay men weren't just gay; they were paedophiles. All gay men were paedophiles.
Oh dear,
that's true.
But listen, while we're talking genders, we've got male and female here. You know, we have to confess that idea of, you know, I've got masses of unconscious bias about who men are and what they think. Yep. And I remember as a kid watching The Quiet Man. It was my mammy's favourite film. Aye. But I remember thinking that they must have to pay John Wayne a lot of money to kiss and be romantic and hug, because, you know, she'd be into it, but he wouldn't be into that. You know, like he'd be like, men aren't into kissing. Women love hugging and kissing, but men have got other things to do, you know. It's like, you think about the Janet John books, you know, she was in making scones. Janet was making scones with Mum, but they were building a boat. You know, John was doing the wee stuff. I remember thinking, I don't want to bake scones. I want to build a boat. I want to be
right. You know, yes, great conversation, Libby.
We've all been brought up with these kind of ideas of. I remember one time watching Sinbad with my dad, and the sailors had all crashed their ships because the sirens were singing in the rocks, and I must have been maybe 8 or 9. And I was watching Sinbad with my dad, and I said, oh, God, because I wanted to build boats. Oh, these beautiful boats. Why are they crashing them on the rocks? What's going on? And my dad said, well, the women are singing. And I was like, right, are they bad singers? He was like, no. And I was like, right, so is it just putting them... the idea that men were interested in women singing, the idea that there would be some allure that would distract the men from sailing their beautiful ships, I could not understand why a guy would be interested in a woman singing. What would be interesting about that for a guy?
You've got me thinking there with that, right? So I was thinking about this just the other day, funnily enough. I was studying over in America about 10 years ago, and one of the things that I learned was how detrimental it was to the human brain to be trained out of being left-handed. So just bear with me. These are just transient thoughts going through my head as we're having this discussion, right? I'll try and formulate them as best as I can. So if you're a left-handed child and that hand would have got tied behind your back. Now, if there's young people listening, that did happen. I'm no making this up. And that had a detrimental effect on the human organism's brain. If you're meant to be left-handed, you're meant to be left-handed. You're not meant to be trained to work with your right hand. That has a really bad effect in the brain. Now, I believe that we've been trained into thinking that men should be at the head of the table. I don't think that's real. I think that women should be in authority. I think women have got... And don't hey, hold on, let's not get into we should be equal. Because men and women aren't equal. They're never going to be equal. They're not going to be equal because we're very different, right? And I think that women are the ones that birth their children. Women are the ones that should be in authority. And I think somewhere like the left-handed trained to be right, I think we've been trained into believing that men are supposed to be at the helm of the ship. And I think that's just as detrimental to our society because we've been led to believe something that's actually no accurate.
It's a bit separation, isn't it? That we're always trying to separate ourselves from each other.
Yes.
You are different from me and therefore I belong here and you belong there. But I suppose it's interesting to bring in the thought of, is it always negative to have an unconscious bias? Does it actually bring balance to us? Never judge a book by its cover, or do we actually need to a tiny bit of that to protect ourselves? Do we need to have
an
unconscious bias like, I don't feel safe here and therefore I must go?
Yes.
And so even though it's based on unconscious bias, maybe it's protecting me sometimes as well.
Sure. I remember going to a butch lesbian party once with a pal and I was terrified of the women.
Were you?
Yeah, because there was some real violence going on in that room and I just was like, oh no, this is like an archetypal more macho than macho. In my head, all my pals who were feminist lesbians were, had peppermint tea bags in their bags and like cats and stuff like that. All of a sudden I was with these girls and they had braces and bobber boots and there was a fight get out and it just terrified me. Ross, what you're saying about the, matriarchal societies used to be the norm. Of course, because you could only prove lineage by actually watching a baby born. You could only go, that's definitely her Wayne. So that was the safest way to make sure that the good genes were getting passed on. Whereas he could go, that's my Wayne. It wouldn't necessarily be. So matriarchal societies were the norm. When did the patriarchy kind of get up, There's a theory, I'll tell you this theory, which I think is really funny. The reason that men are in leadership roles all over the world, and they are, the reason the patriarchy is alive and well and thriving is because when the 2-year-old understands that not only are they not their mother, they're not even like their mother, if they're a 2-year-old boy, that's really frightening. Whereas the female brain, the feminine brain goes, oh my God, not only am I not, when symbiosis, when the baby realises I am not my mother and then my mother's not me, she could leave the room and I will be separate. That's when the terrible two starts, supposedly. So when symbiosis collapses and you now realise you are an individual, what baby girl goes is, okay, I'm not my mother, but at some level I know I'm like her. Whereas baby boy goes, oh no, not only am I not, when I say mother, the carer, not only am I not like her, she can leave the room without me. And that's when the boy goes, I need to be in control. I need to be Don't know if that's true.
Aye.
But I have my unconscious biases about the fact that I think that men don't hurt the way we hurt which is a nonsense.
Because that is probably a nonsense, isn't it? I would say.
Yeah.
That we've
ridiculous.
designed.
Absolutely ridiculous.
That we've designed that men don't cry and men need to be strong and all that. And we've actually, and it's not often I'm talking up for the men, I'll be honest with you, but we've gaslighted them as well. I feel as if it's my word, but we've gaslighted them as well into believing that they can't show emotion, and that is very, very challenging and very destructive, actually, isn't it?
Absolutely. I don't know if you'd agree with this, Ross, but I once was working with a mindfulness teacher, and he said to me that as a man who runs men's groups, what he understood was that every man he'd met at some level felt responsible for the bad stuff. And what he said was, what women don't understand about men is that because in general it is quite often a male who's the guy that did the murder, did the rape,
Yes.
He said, every man I've ever met has a real sore, vulnerable space inside him because he thinks, God, I'm the gender that did the bad stuff.
It's all men that are rapists, it's all men that are paedophiles, it's all men that are murderers, but there are women that are paedophiles, there are women that have raped men, and there are women that have murdered.
Yeah.
And we're carrying this unconscious guilt, if you like. But it's also an unconscious bias that's then being created that men are bad, men are to be feared.
Yeah.
Yep. And so where do we go to then? As we start to round this up, where do we go to? How do we start to be aware of our unconscious bias and let them
It's awareness as
up?
we're walking towards the Indian family coming down Nevis. Watch my little brain go, I've got an unconscious bias that they've got Delta 5.
Let's understand that what love would look like is if we lost some labels. So it's about the labels collapsing, so when we talk about the sacred feminine, it can be in a man, it can be in a woman, it can be when we talk about, the
divinity.
There's a kind of, the divine spark that's about community and about, that's one of the things that I think the Scots have this idea. The Scots are often accused unconscious bias of tall poppy syndrome. The Scots go, I can't your father, you don't get above yourself and all that stuff. Well, actually, I think there's something really beautiful in there, because what it's saying basically is, we need you on board. Don't get above yourself. This is a community that needs to look after each other. We need to actually start collapsing the labels of male, female, somebody that's only interested in this or only interested in that. Basically, we're encouraging our girls to do anything now, do anything they want to do, anything you want to be, you can be, that old joke about the story where it's lateral thinking, where you say the man climbed the hill and he died and his wee son was taken off into the surgery, and the surgeon runs in and goes, I can't operate on this boy, that's my son. And people go, wait, his dad died? But the surgeon said it. And of course, it's a woman. The surgeon's his mammy, and you go, oh, God, I never thought of that. So that's going to work less and less these days, because women are becoming surgeons and pilots and, it used to be...
politicians.
And politicians,
And
so
first ministers.
Let's lose some labels here. Right. Let's start sharing our unconscious biases with each other and saying, God, make me wrong here, tell me different, give me insight, open my mind.
And I think owning it as well, like own your
stuff.
Shit, own the fact I actually had judged you before I even met you, and that's something that's really ringing to me. Before I judge the man in the grey suit, do you know, Anne? Don't judge the man in the grey suit with the grey hair.
Everything.
The posh
accountability is everything, absolutely. And the guy who said to me, who's that girl on the radio? He ended up being quite a nice guy, really. Anyway, well done, guys.
Good
one. So,
thank you.
See you next time. Thank you for listening to our programme. You can find future episodes on Acast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. With thanks to Matt Ramsey for editing and mixing this episode. This podcast was produced by Solace Sounds.